In a recent article, reporter Teddy Schleifer recounted details from his interview with former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried in his home in Palo Alto, California. Schleifer also said the first thing that he noticed was SBF's German Shepherd greeting him at the door, and then the second thing was, of course, the ankle monitor on his foot.
Reporter Teddy Schleifer is here to tell us more about this conversation with SBF. Welcome, Teddy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, this interview is quite the scoop. You talk about hitching a ride to see SBF at his house where he's living a kind of cloistered existence with just his family. You read about how it was quiet when you got there. His parents seemed to be upstairs, didn't come down during the interview, and kind of painted a very interesting portrait of what his day-to-day life is like right now. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to get access for this interview?
Sure. I mean, it's a totally fair question because obviously, understatement of the century that people who are under house arrest, charged with perpetrating one of the greatest financial crimes in American history, don't typically welcome anybody, reporters, observers, lawyers, into their lair, right? I mean, obviously, there's enormous legal risk that he already faces, and when you start welcoming people who can ask questions about your mental state or your decisions, that can only expand your legal risk. But I mean, the reason why I think Sam wanted me there, and I think why Sam is, an unusual defendant, to put it mildly, is he, like lots of, people in the spotlight, feels that he is misunderstood. And as a reporter, you often witness people in these emotional, raw, highest profile moments of their life. And to some extent, as a journalist, and you're looking for the overlap in the Venn diagram. You're looking for the moment where what you want, which is, to capture somebody and deliver a great story, overlaps with what the subject wants. And what the subject wants here is to be better understood. So that's kind of, it was the better alignment that it doesn't happen every day, right? I mean, ultimately, what's keeping that Venn diagram from overlapping often are the lawyers, the handlers, the parents, the people who say, shut up.
Or one's own self-interest, to be honest. And so, I mean, it kind of begs the question, did you sense these moments? Did you sense moments, despite him wanting to be, let's say, better understood, where you felt like he was perhaps undermining his own interest? And, did you ask questions? I mean, did he seem contrite? Did he seem to understand his own legal liability? Do you think it was grounded in an understanding of what his vulnerability was legally? Or do you think there's a kind of hubris operating here where some people have opined that he seems to think that he can outwit the public, outwit the legal case against him, et cetera?
Well, just, a day or two after our story published at Puck, Sam wrote a Substack post.
We read and talked about that and had great interest in that.
But it's sort of the same thing, right? I mean, ultimately, that obviously, opens up, I can tell you, SDNY prosecutors are reading that post closely. And, typically, in crisis comms, right? I mean, you guys know this as well as anybody, right? You have kind of a narrow surgical response to arguments, and you litigate it in the court that, is best handled to adjudicate it, whether that's like a real court or the court of public opinion. Sam here seems to think that, the legal risk that he may be incurring by speaking to me or speaking to, his followers on Substack is basically worth it, right? He thinks that ultimately he's not going to sit there and take, 9 months or a year or however long of punches. He wants to fight. And maybe you win, marginal sympathy in the PR battle, day to day, but obviously, that incurs, legal risk. So it's kind of a question of whether or not it's worth winning, the public relations war on Tuesday, if it means, extending years more in jail. Only he can answer that.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Okay, so you have talked to him. So from reading the Substack, I guess I'll start with that. He comes across as thinking that what happened was essentially a really bad confluence of almost acts of lightning striking the same place a number of times, and then having this rival, Binance, working against him when he maybe didn't expect that, and he had enough. He was set up to survive enough bad stuff happening, but that was the tipping point that they weren't prepared for, and because of that, and he's like he feels that they screwed up because they didn't prepare for that, but that was not a catastrophically misguided thing that they were doing, is his perspective. Right. Because it would have taken all these things plus someone working against him to destroy him. Is that what he sounds like, from conversation? It's not understanding or thinking that there's a broader criminality about it, really, or even really careless thinking, which is what so many people are describing it as. How could this person just, throw away all this money, gambling it away? But from his thinking, it wasn't really doing that. Can you speak to his mindset, or is that how it comes across?
Yeah, I mean, look, there is an element of that, right? Look. He talks about, for instance, like lots of companies that have struggled over the last couple of months or the last year, right? He talks about the broader crypto downturn. I mean, there is an element of, Sam was going to show up in Congress and say that he effed up, right, for national television. So he was prepared to take some responsibility, but ultimately, he calls it this failure to hedge that he sort of blames on Alameda, which as you guys have talked about, is this affiliated hedge fund, which Sam says he didn't really control. So, like, to some extent, I think there's contrition. And I do believe, he knows the consequences, right? He understands there are people who, lost money as a result of him effing up. But he sort of paints it in this broader context of, like, lots of companies were effing up around this time, essentially. But Sam also is aware of the fact that, like, one of my takeaways from the interview is that he is contrite, but he's almost performatively contrite, that he knows he's supposed to be contrite. And I don't necessarily think that's that different than any politician who's kind of going through a scandal, right? Where do they think that the media is out to get them or their opponents are out to get them? Absolutely. Do they think that they screwed up, when they plagiarized a speech or something like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they know they screwed up.
Or fabricated an entire origin story and all of their achievements.
Whatever, sure. I mean, honestly, this could apply to any scandal in any industry where people in the crosshairs feel that they both made a mistake, but it's still motivated by their enemies. But they just know they shouldn't talk about the second thing, right? So they are contrite, but they also almost exaggerate their true contrition, if that makes sense, because they know that they need to, like, play nice for the cameras.
Well, and he seems to also think that, or at least in that Substack, it comes across at the end that it was all salvageable. He could have made right by everyone, but then the bankruptcy people come in and they just say, well, to hell with even trying. Like, we could have given it another go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That sounds like it's the opposite of contrition. When you write about it feeling put upon, like a formulaic kind of contrition, a performance of contrition, that to me feels a lot more accurate. And we saw a little bit behind the veil, right, in that Vox interview that wasn't supposed to be a Vox interview, where he was DMing with someone who we thought was not on the record with, and he said some, I think, more honest things about how the effective altruism was. Some of the effective altruism was kind of also performative. It was a scam. It wasn't. It's the thing you got to do for PR, exactly. And this is the main critique that has come down about SBF and the coverage of SBF, and why he wasn't discovered more quickly. I started watching a Bernie Madoff documentary over the weekend, and I was having these flashbacks. Yeah. Because there were people who kind of called it out and saw something suspicious earlier on, but because this guy just seemed in like Flynn, he was in the nice building, he knew all the right people, he was married to a woman from an affluent family. I mean, this is Bernie Madoff, not SBF we're talking about here. But the same truth. This SBF is the son of Stanford professors. Everyone likes the whiz kid narrative. We have the Elizabeth Holmes of it all, the black turtle, like the mystique, the beanbag. People are concerned that still reporters have he's just like me orientation toward him, and are not treating him the way that someone who stole a pack of cigarettes from a convenience store would be treated in the media. And when he talks about, like if I just hedged differently, this could have worked out. Most of the time, this kind of thing works out. It sounds like a drunk driver rationalizing that 9 of the last 10 times he drove drunk, there happened not to be an accident, as though that absolves him from putting himself in that risky situation. So, I mean, what do you make of that, and how do you negotiate that tension as a journalist covering him?
Yeah, look, I mean, the results speak for themselves, right? I mean, the guy is indicted and is probably, legally screwed here. So as a journalist, I think we what we write matters, obviously, but it also to some extent doesn't right now, because even if he has the best press in the world, in 9 months this guy is going to see his day in court and is probably going to be deep six legally when this is all said and done. So there's I understand your point about totally. I mean, there should be self-reflection upon the media about how Sam was perceived, but I also think this is ultimately a display of how the justice system kind of works eventually, regardless of whether or not people write nice things about him. Is ultimately there are prosecutors who are on the case, who are subpoenaing records, who are doing lots of things that reporters can't do. Right? I'm not a crypto reporter, but there are folks who can scrutinize Sam's activities in a way that crypto reporters cannot. And I almost wonder sometimes if we put too much emphasis on kind of the media's influence to extract accountability when ultimately there are tools that prosecutors have, and frankly there are facts that prosecutors now know about that we didn't know about 6 months ago, right? We didn't know about kind of the precise relationship between FTX and Alameda in even June or July, and now we're going to have a lot more facts at our disposal, and I think the public record will correct itself eventually. I don't know if that's satisfying, right? Because we would all love for everything to be known at the time. Surely, FTX, customers would have loved to have known all these things 6 months ago. But I don't know. Things might work out eventually. Not that we're rooting for an outcome, and obviously, if he's acquitted, he's acquitted. But there's an element of kind of self-correction that the justice system has at its disposal.
I think what's a little frightening, perhaps, or at least gives people pause, is the idea that whether or not the criminal justice system is going to do what it's going to do, Sam Bankman-Fried seems to believe that there is some advantage to talking to the press in this way. And I think people are just hopeful that he's not right. If he's able to affect public opinion in a way that allows him to elude substantive accountability for, this multi-billion-dollar theft loss, however you want to characterize it. But thank you so much for joining us, Teddy. It's a really incredible article, and I encourage people to read it over at Puck.
Thanks so much.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.